Hey everyone, Rogue Gold here, and today we have got something special, guys. If you thought I was clickbaiting by saying that everything is being changed, I really wasn't. Today, Drew and Frederick were on Stay of the Game with Hamish to outline the huge changes coming to the RPG and core of the game in the big update that is slated for after Episode 3. So what I'm going to do here is I have a long list of notes I took of everything they revealed on Stay of the Game, and I'm going to go over them with all of the visuals on screen of any examples and things they showed, so you guys can see all this stuff for yourselves. Sorry if there's a bit of overlap or reiterations in my information. The devs revisited topics a few times over the course of the info dump, so I might repeat myself slightly. But yeah, that being said, let's get into this. Alright, so like I said, this was Stay of the Game number 143. It started off with Thylander reiterating what he said on Twitter after last week's Stay of the Game, that he was going to bring the thunder in terms of news and examples and information and all that, and I would say that he certainly delivered. So they start off with priority alerts. There was a maintenance yesterday, didn't really change anything on the player experience end, but they did want to mention that invisible wall fixes have been delayed until Episode 3. I guess that was coming before, but they will be coming next month with Episode 3. Two other things coming with Episode 3 will be stuck NPCs. They discovered the cause for that, so that's going to be fixed. And being stuck in the UI and not being able to respawn in the DZ will also be coming in that update. And that was it. They spent very little time on that and got straight to what everyone was here for, and that is the Drew and Thylander developer interview. So, there's a big reboot coming to the game, and this is after Episode 3. If I had to guess, I would say this big update will probably come maybe April. I think it's going to be a little bit of time after Episode 3, but we shouldn't have to wait too long. So yeah, they want to kind of discuss why we're here, why we're at this point. Pretty much there's too many RPG elements for players to deal with. There's a lot of inventory stress. You go in there, you have to look at a lot of things, and you don't really know exactly what to keep and what not to, that kind of stuff. So that is why we're at this point. They also wanted to make sure to explain that we're only discussing one of the three big aspects of this reboot today, and that's gear. The other two will be discussed next week. That's recalibration and skill power. And so, yeah, today was focused on gear. And they also, which this is pretty cool, wanted to say that these changes to the gear and to the core of the game aren't coming alone. Along with this, there's going to be a new power cap, new gear to chase, new content, and just a lot of stuff is coming all at once with this. I have a feeling, and I said this before the Episode 3, and clearly I was wrong there, but I have a feeling that one of the reasons why we've had such a lack of content is that they're now kind of saving everything they're coming up with for this one big update to hopefully draw a lot of people back in. That's my thought anyway, but we'll have to wait and see on that. So, basically, they went over the problems with the current way that gear is in the game. It's too rare right now for you to get usable items for your builds. It's very hard to get ones that are the way you want them and viable. It's hard to understand exactly how a piece of gear would fit into your build and fit into the game overall. There's too many items, too much loot in their minds. There's no satisfaction right now in god rolls, because you could have a really high roll weapon damage, but something else is super low, so then you have to save that weapon damage roll for another piece of gear. Basically, that's, not very satisfactory. And they said there's too many hybrid builds, which at first when I heard that, I was like, what? Because usually you think of hybrids in Division 1 were kind of the ideal build and the fun thing to run. But they said basically builds that are good at everything, like the tank and shotgun and heal meta, double heal meta, and PvP is super cheesy. So yes, they're right. There are too many hybrid builds, and there's not many defined roles among groups and among builds. There's no interesting trade-offs when you make a build. So the coming package in terms of gear, they said all gear is being rebooted. This includes old gear that you have now is being converted to this new system. There will be a new power cap, like I stated. There will be new items and new things to play. So, here we go right into the new gear system. They wanted to make it intuitive, so you don't need a website to go and see what things are best. I never really used any of those websites, but definitely a lot of people did, and it helped them out. But they want to make it so that you can do everything that you need to and understand everything in the game. It will still be a deep system. They didn't want to make it sound like they're dumbing anything down, but it should be comprehensible in the game, and not like you need some guide outside of it. And they also wanted to make sure that there's satisfying upgrades to your build as you're going along and building it, and you can make, tangible progress. Unlike now how you can grind for a single piece of gear for a super long time, get like a mediocre upgrade. They really just want it to be clear and make it feel good. So they went right into it. The budget system is gone, which is fantastic. I don't don't really need to go into my thoughts on that, but it wasn't a great system. So stats are all now independent of one another. If you get a super high weapon damage roll, that does not affect any other roll on the piece of gear. They all roll independently of one another, meaning you can get god rolls. There is now a bar underneath each roll, so you can see how good it is. And they tuned all brands, all of the brand sets, to fit more into playstyles. They especially checked the low popularity ones that people were using. Murakami, there's a screenshot coming later, has been completely changed, and Gila has health now instead of hazard protection. There's a lot of brand changes that are coming, which, is a big change in and of itself, but that's not even what we're talking about here, because now we get into the meat of it. Basically, how it works is that gear now has core attributes, and this is a single roll on each of the 6 pieces of gear: mask, backpack, chest, gloves, holster, and knee pads all have a single core attribute, and that can roll to be 3 things: weapon damage, skill tiers, which I have my thoughts on that, but I won't elaborate because they're going to it next week. I don't want to give any misinformation, so I'll wait to talk about skills until next week. But weapon damage, skill tiers, and flat armor, and that's it. So, and these 3 things come now on all 6 pieces of gear. So you have a big choice to make on what kind of build you want to spec into. And you have 6 pieces of gear that you can, obviously there are sub-roles and smaller attributes that can fit into your build, but these 6 choices are really what make up the bulk of your build. And some people may think that sounds like it's dumbing it down, but I'll go into it later. But this is a fantastic change in my mind. Health is not a core attribute. That is one of the what they call minor attributes. And so, that probably means that Berserk and Clutch isn't going to be a huge thing anymore, and I'm fine with that, because I never used it. Some people are going to be mad about that, but I think that having health and armor together made for a lot of weird balancing things in terms of PvP, so I think just having flat armor be the one core attribute, I think that's going to do wonders for the balance and overall health of the game. Also, Recal is getting changed. I said that's something they're talking about next week. They had some weird wording about what it is, but yeah, I'll say my thoughts until they discuss that next Wednesday. And so they stress that if the bar underneath the roll is high, and again, that bar is what determines how good of a roll it is, then that's the highest it can get on any piece for your level. So if you have something that's maxed out, say you have, I think on their builds, 12.8% weapon damage was the highest. If you have that, you can know that is the highest roll you can get on any piece of gear at your level across the game. You don't have to worry about, some gear set or some other thing being higher. That is the max roll for everything. So that's good to know. And they also said that there's going to be a spot in the game where you can go and investigate the max rolls for all pieces of gear. So I'm hoping it's kind of just like an info bank. You can basically go and visit it in the base, kind of investigate and see what each of the different rolls and pieces of gear can roll in terms of stats. So I think that's really cool. That should be really helpful for people to make builds. And again, not having to use a website, having that be in the game is really cool. So then they talked about talents. Talents no longer have requirements, which is very interesting. But they explained that kind of goes along with the core attribute changes, because, if you have 6 rolls of weapon damage, if you roll something that aids your armor, you already don't have a lot of armor. So this will make more sense as I go on, but talents have no more requirements. They amplify your stats, the talents do, and you'll see an example of that later on. There are fewer talents now, but more impactful ones that'll help your build all at once. So again, you'll see that in the examples coming up. And talents, this is big, are only on backpacks and chest pieces. Talents that were on anything else are now gone, and that's pretty crazy. And yeah, again, you'll see there's an example build that they showed coming up, and you'll see all this in action. So they showed some example talents. Here we go. I'll put it up on the screen. And they want to stress that these pieces of gear are at about 80% of their overall potential power, if that makes sense. So they wanted to stress that these talents really play into group synergy and roles. So that's really good. So I'll go over these ones that are here. So on the far left, we have leadership. Performing a cover-to-cover movement grants 20% of your armor as bonus armor to you and all allies for 10 seconds. And then that has a 10-second cooldown. So right there you can see 20% of your armor. So if you have a build that's spec'd entirely into weapon damage, this leadership bonus is going to do nothing for you in your group because it's 20% of your armor. So I hope you can kind of see how that makes things way more balanced, is that it's really based off of your build, and you can't spec into everything at once like you can now. So it's really good. And then in the middle, we have Companion. While you're within 5 meters of an ally or skill, total weapon damage is increased by 5%. And then on the right, we have Empathic Resolve. When you repair an ally, increase their total weapon and skill damage by 20% for 10 seconds and 5% if it is yourself. So again, these things are really, they made sure to stress that they're also definitely solo talents. They just really wanted to highlight the group synergies and talents that are coming. And I think that's a really good thing, because even though there's a problem in PvP now where you can't, pretty much do anything past a 1v1 like you could in Division 1, you also can't really hold out against a server. Even though it's only 12 people servers, it's kind of, I'm not saying you can't do it. I've done it before, but it's a lot harder to do 4v8s in this case than it was to do 4v20s in Division 1. So these group synergies will really help skilled players and knowledgeable players really perform at their best, and that's awesome. And they just stressed again that your builds buff your teammates depending on what you spec into, so that's really cool. Then they briefly touched on mods, and mods are fewer overall, and they only rule one stat, which, some people might be bummed about that. I think, again, this is to lend towards balancing, and I think that that'll be a lot more, it'll make a lot more sense in the health of the game, and I think it's a good change. So here, they went on to an example build, and Hamish asked what the orange glows below each of those gear rolls are, and they said that that's a god roll. So if the bar goes all the way up and you get the max roll, then it kind of glows orange, so just so it's a little visual representation. And then they went to the first piece of gear, and Reckless returns. Now it is called Glass Cannon. If you know what I'm talking about, Reckless was a talent from Division 1 that everyone liked a lot. So Glass Cannon is that all damage you deal is amplified by 25%, and all damage you take is amplified by 50%, which sounds like a shitload right now. They also, I should say that everything that they show here is a work in progress. It is not finalized, so these values could definitely change, and I would think that 50% will probably be tuned down, because that's kind of a lot. But yeah, Reckless is back in the form of Glass Cannon, and that is awesome. Some of the minor attributes are that they showed are crit chance, crit damage, hazard protection, armor regen, which now armor regen works all the time. So if you have, say, 10,000 armor regen, every second your armor is being regen by 10,000, even while you're in the middle of shooting someone in combat. I think that's really cool. That's definitely going to be a nice stat to spec into. The next talent they showed was Obliterate. Critical hits increase total weapon damage by 1% for 5 seconds, stacks up to 15 times, so that one's pretty interesting. They kind of gave a little example. They went to the gloves and showed that they have armor on them, and so on this kind of weapon-focused build, they traded off the weapon damage to focus their build and get some more survivability. So it's just kind of an example of how those 6 core choices on each one of your pieces of gear really affects how your build performs and acts. So that's cool. They stressed again that old gear is getting converted, and named items will still be better than the regular ones, even in the slots where you can't get a talent anymore, because their individual stat rolls can actually roll higher than the god rolls on normal high-end pieces of gear. So say, for example, you have Emperor's Guard is a Murakami knee pad named item in the game right now. Say you get a 12.8% weapon damage god roll on a regular high-end knee pad in this new system, well, the Emperor's Guard one could roll, let's just give an example, 13.5%. So you will be able to roll past the god rolls just on named items. And I think that's a really cool way to still make named items valuable, even though all the pieces except chest piece and backpack are losing talents. So that's good. They also said that exotics and gear sets have been reworked for this system as well, so that's awesome. We'll get into gear sets in just a moment. And Thylander gave a little bit of a hint. I don't know if it was at an exotic backpack, but I think he was just more about talking in principle, that they would have to make, if there does become a exotic backpack or chest piece, they would definitely need to compensate and make them very powerful, because you're losing one of the only 2 talents you can get on your build now. So they have that in mind, and that's good to know that they're keeping those kinds of things in mind. And hopefully we do get an exotic backpack. That would be very cool to see. So then they went into gear sets, and they showed off Hardwired, which has been reworked, but they stressed that all sets were revisited, reworked, more fun, more powerful, and they have 2, 3, and 4 pieces of bonuses like they do now. So the example they showed for Hardwired, the new 4-piece seems very powerful and very viable, and you can read it there on the screen, and it definitely seems a lot more intuitive than it is now. So that might even be one that I'd try out, because that seems pretty fun. And so basically how gear sets work for the talents on the chest and backpack is now they come with an amplification talent. So basically, say the one they showed for Hardwired was that you get 10% skill damage and repair. Well, if you choose to run a backpack or chest piece of hardware, because you're losing out on a regular talent, you get a special talent that amplifies what the gear set already does. So instead of that 10%, if you run a backpack or chest piece, now it does 50%, which is huge. So I think that's a good way to give the player a choice on whether they want to buff up what the gear set does or get one of the regular talents because they're so limited now. And they said that there are lots of combinations. Even though it to some people it may seem like this is dumbing down or lessening the RPG aspect and build making of the game, there's so many combinations to take into consideration. There's high ends, gear sets, exotics, all of your weapon talents, the 2 talents on the backpack and chest piece. There's just a lot coming in now that should all be a lot more balanced than the system we have now, or even had in Division 1. That's the thing, and I'll get into that at the end of this video. And Thylander said it has been, and I quote, hella fun for the devs to play internally, so that's good to hear. He said it's much easier to see if something is good when it drops on the ground and when you get it from a loot source, and that's good. I mean, obviously, a lot of me and a lot of you guys know if something's good by looking at it because we played the game for a long time, but for a new player, this will be good to let them know with that bar to know if a roll is good or not. They said it's very gratifying to play the system to get loot that actually matters. They reminded that this is just a third of the piece to the overall puzzle of this rework, obviously including skill power and recal coming next week. It's easier to build now and easier to figure out what kind of build you want to make. So if you want to make a weapon damage build, you don't have to think about what pieces can you get weapon damage on, what kind of mods do I need, and what kind of brands. Now you know, okay, I need to roll weapon damage on each of my 6 pieces or however many you want to do. And it's just, I'm just so excited that this is coming because it just makes everything so much more streamlined and easier and balanced. They also stressed, because a lot of people in the chat were concerned, that solo players have not been neglected. A lot of the talents they were showing were group oriented. That's just because they wanted to highlight that aspect that has not really been present in Division 2 so far, whereas solo players definitely have options now. So solo players have not been neglected. They're definitely solo-oriented talents and talents that work with solo builds that are coming. And they said that this rework they're working on has been a long time coming. They've taken, pretty much since launch, all the feedback that the community has given. They asked the ETF guys back in, October, September. They were showing these concepts to them way back then. So this has been a long time coming, and that should mean, especially now that they're showing it off early, should mean that it's gonna be pretty good. They also said that they want to kind of change the loot drops in the game, basically in the way that today you get a lot of loot very quickly, but most of it's trash, and they even use that word themselves, so it's good that they're able to be negative on themselves. But ideally, and what this rework will bring, is that you get a little bit less loot, but most of it is more interesting and viable than the kind of stuff we're getting now. So that's good to hear. I think that's definitely a worthy and good change. So they took a bit of a pause from talking about all that stuff to go to a developer Q&A. First, they had one with a designer named Bruce, and they asked him about named items, how will it work, and will there be new ones with the new Gear 2.0, they're calling it. And he said that with this update and updates past this rework, they will be almost doubling the existing named item pool, which that's a lot of stuff. So obviously that's coming at some point. That's good to hear. And then they talked to Trick Dempsey, and just kind of a throwaway question, why allies don't always come to help you at the nest control point. He said basically there has to be, the world is all simulated, so there has to be a free patrol within a kilometer of the control point, otherwise you won't get help. And so, yeah, no one cares about that. Okay, back to the gear stuff. They were just kind of answering a few chat questions here, so this might be a bit of a overlap, but base weapon damage will also have the bar underneath it. So when you go on a gun, say your Police M4 has 20k damage. Well, before, you didn't really know what the max was unless you went to crafting and saw what it was there, but that wasn't even always the max. So now there will be a bar underneath your base weapon damage showing you how high it is, and I think that's really awesome, because that is something that I would definitely use an external source for to find that out. And they said the gear conversion won't be a shuffle. It won't be like you have a really good Gila chest piece and they're just going to kind of hit the randomize button on what kind of rolls you're going to get on it. Gear that is good now should and will be good in the update. Because there's no budget system, although this is kind of a weird point, but he said because there's no budget system, you can't make a mistake in recalibration. But in the current way it is now, recal doesn't affect the budget of anything else on your piece. So that's kind of a void point in my mind. So here we have two bombshells that they really say for the end. Damage to elites is gone. And they stress damage is damage. And that's awesome. Because damage to elites was just like, if you wanted to make a PvE build, here's your cookie cutter way of doing it. You have to have damage to elites or you make a skill build. But, just It's so nice that they're going to be focusing on having these core attributes. And if you want to make a damage build, whether it's for PvE or PvP, you spec into damage. And I think that's awesome. Instead of having these cheesy, shortcuts to getting around, being good at everything, this is really awesome. So damage elites is gone. And guess what else is gone, guys? Percent fucking armor, which is fantastic. Because percent armor ruined everything. Now that there's just going to be flat armor, if someone wants to be tanky, they're not going to be able to deal damage. They're not going to be able to get a percent armor roll and a flat armor roll on one piece of gear and have 400,000 armor and be one-tapping you with a double barrel. Obviously, they didn't talk about shotgun specifically, but it's percent armor being gone means that even though you have flat armor a lot, you'll still be tanky for sure, but it means that you won't just have these insane numbers and still be able to do other things. So that's fantastic that percent armor is gone. They did say that it could still be on brands, like on Gila, you still might get the 5%, but it will not be on gear, and that's fine. The 5% on Gila is a nice bonus to be able to put on. But when you can get these 30% rolls on chest pieces and backpacks, it's just incredibly cheesy. So that's gone, and that's fantastic. They said that if you have DT and those things now, percent armor and DT, it'll get converted to another good damage or armor stat. So that's good to know. And they just reiterated once more that this is coming after episode 3, but it's definitely nice that they're able to start talking about it now, be more transparent, get some feedback on it. And I agree, that's definitely a very good thing to do. And then they finished it off. That was all they had to say about gear. And they said next week is the other two pieces to this puzzle, and that's recalibration and skill power. Now, I have some thoughts on skill power, and you probably have your own from seeing these screenshots, but I will save my thoughts until next week when they just flat out tell it to us. So, as I'm sure you all can see, these changes are going to be monumental in size and importance to the game as a whole. We don't know what kind of content is coming with these changes yet, but given it's a new power cap, that probably means a new world tier, which is awesome. I want to touch briefly on how all of this affects PvP, because I alluded to it a little bit ago, but overall, I think it's going to be incredible. Actually, I think that there's a chance that these changes bring the most balanced PvP environment we've ever seen in the franchise. Now, to be clear, that is not saying that this will make PvP better than it was in Division 1, because it won't, but I think it has a damn fair chance of being the most balanced. A strict trade-off system for the 3 big avenues of builds is fantastic, and as long as they keep the minor attributes and talent values in check, then I think we're set for a pretty fair and player skill-focused environment. Because think about it, say that tank builds become a problem again for whatever reason under this new system. All they would need to do is lower the core attribute value cap across the board, and boom, the problem's solved. This new system allows for the same build diversity and creativity without having a million different factors to consider in terms of balancing and effectiveness. This will most definitely have an inherent effect on gear versus skill when it comes to player performance, and that's something I'm definitely looking forward to. Alright, well, I don't want to ramble on for too long, so I'll end it here. Thank you all very much if you stuck around till the end. If you enjoyed this video and are hyped for these changes, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you can be notified as soon as I upload about the new details we get on next week's State of the Game. We're in a bit of a lull right now, but with Episode 3 and these awesome changes on the horizon, I think we're in store for some good times. Until the next one, guys, Rogue Gold, out.